Welcome back to the People's Basics, home of the universal basics. In today's episode, we are going to be giving a retrospection on the loss of Andrew Yang's mayoral campaign. Last night, Andrew Yang decided to concede the mayoral election due to his standing currently with the first place votes. We will not know the final election results until a little bit later on, closer to around July 6th. But these are the initial results that we have here on the screen showing for you all. Currently, with 84% reporting from last night, Eric Adams currently has 31.7%. Maya Wiley currently has 22.3%. Catherine Garcia has 19.5%. Andrew Yang has 11.7%, and not pictured here, but Scott Stringer, who was the other person considered like one of the final five, ended with 5.6%. So, what do we take away from this campaign? I think there's a lot for us to reflect on now. But before I get into anything where it was shortcomings or where we fell back short, I want to reemphasize, I really wanted Andrew Yang to win. We made a ton of videos here explaining why we thought he was the best candidate. We had an organizing effort to get our team to make thousands of calls for the Yang campaign. And so we really wanted him to win. We really respect him and want to see what he has going forward for the future. But we have to acknowledge that we didn't run a perfect campaign. Far from it. And we need to learn from that so that we can improve going forward and know what is the next step for the movement. And so that's what I would like to cover today. Before I get into that, I just want to show a brief clip of Andrew Yang's concession moment so that you all have a sense of why he made the decision to drop out, as well as what is on his mind, potentially considering next steps or just how he wants to address the New York City political scene. So let's check that out for a moment. Okay, so as you could see from that, Andrew Yang wanted to concede because he is a math guy, a data guy, and he saw that the results were just not going to be working for him, as we just showed you. And then he wants to stay involved in New York City politics, that he does not regret any of the decisions that he made in regard to trying to do the last-minute campaigning with Catherine Garcia, and that he was proud of being able to address certain key moments within the city, like especially the rise in Asian hate crime. So I want to now go into where we think Yang fell short, conclude finally on what do we think are the next steps for Yang Gang, as well as for Andrew Yang himself. So where did we fall short? In my opinion, the first and foremost one is even the race itself. I believe, as did some of Yang's previous senior advisors on his 2020 campaign, that this was the wrong race for Andrew Yang. He should not have run for New York City mayor. And of course, we were going to support him along the way because we thought he was the best choice. But this was a bad result. I said this in September. I said this in December. I said this in March. And I have even said it a couple weeks ago, even before we got the final results. The reason why this was the wrong race, in my opinion, was a couple things. One, it's timing. The timing was poor. He was just coming off an effort of campaigning away from New York for Joe Biden, campaigning away from New York in Georgia, and he had been basically spending the whole year away from the city during COVID. Now, you can disagree about how much you care about that, but you have to admit the timing is not ideal. It wasn't like he had been spending a lengthy period of time ingratiating himself within the political realm of New York City. It did seem very stark that he just came in and wanted to start learning and running for a New York City mayoral office. I think my strategy, had he been willing to adhere it at the time, was I wanted him, like he told us on our program multiple times, that he wanted that administration role with Joe Biden. That's why a lot of us, frankly, went out and were willing to advocate for Joe Biden. Maybe we would have voted for him anyway, but we were willing to actually hold our nose and say, hey, you all should consider it, because we had people who we expected to be potentially in that admin who we respected, because we were told over and over again that Yang was having talks with the Biden administration and that he was offered even a role, and he turned it down to run for New York City mayor. I think he should have done that and then tried to run against Cuomo in 2022 for a statewide office. Those whole New Paltz comments really go out the window. It really goes out the window that, Yang wasn't born in New York City. He was born in New York. So he is a lifelong born and bred, raised New Yorker. So I think him choosing the mayor's office felt very rushed. And I think he would have done a lot better running for that state office, being able to run on things, frankly, like a single payer healthcare system, like the New York Public Health Act. And so, I ask people, like, why rush this? Why did we go so fast into the mayor's election right after canvassing Georgia? That seemed off to me. So that's one. I thought it was the wrong race for him to run in the first place. The second thing is, I think Yang did not do a good job of lane identification. I think he basically made the attempt to see if he could appeal to all the different lanes as a front runner. But in turn, what this did was subject him to attack from every single lane itself, because he was trying to compete in them all. And he never consolidated one lane of support behind him. And when I talk lanes, what I usually mean is you're going to have very often conservative, moderate, liberal, and even progressive lanes. And, Yang was trying to compete for basically that, honestly, like that moderate liberal. He was trying to compete for them all, as I said. And then you had the other top competitors who were basically Maya Wiley competing for progressives and liberals. You had Catherine Garcia, who was competing for moderates and liberals. And then you had Eric Adams, who was competing for moderates and conservatives. And Yang basically lost out on all of those groups. And so I think he needs to basically take a moment to really ask himself, what's his lane? Can these heterodox policies work together sometimes? I think it's really hard sometimes to be the anti-poverty candidate, true humanitarian compassionism, and then also be the tough on crime candidate at the same time. I think we need to understand what is the group that naturally synergized with what Yang was advocating for, especially as an outsider with no elected political experience, or even just any general government experience. He always needed to appeal to voters who cared a little bit less about that stuff. Moderate voters and even anti-crime voters very much value government experience. They want to know that there's this stability and experience to know how do you actually handle these things and implement these things. That you're being realistic because you've had that experience on the inside to know what is realistic. And so he always needed to appeal more to progressives and liberals and even get some of that crossover moderate support that he would have gotten anyways from his strong support of small businesses to even some of his education policy in terms of enabling choice. So I think he did a really bad job of understanding his own lane. And frankly, he did certain things that basically ostracized him from, particular lanes. Like most definitely, he ostracized himself from a lot of progressives by hitting on some hot button topics that were to his disadvantage. Most notably is his involvement in the Israeli-Palestine conflict. We made a whole video on that specifically because we thought it was very poor form of him to be getting himself involved in that, and the way he handled it was poor in itself. So I think that, and you could even go with things like, immigrant street vendors and like wanting to do targeting on that because basically, he was getting complaints from small business owners. That kind of very much contradicted with his approach of like caring for the vulnerable. It came off as more of an enforcement measure compared to the messaging that he wanted to do and later did, which was that he wanted to help get people incorporated into the legal system and out of the shadows. Like, I think he did a poor job in how he presented some of these really hot button conflicting cultural issues. And so I think that was a major drawback to his campaign, which basically neutered most of his online support and progressive support, which were major strengths that he had built up from his 2020 campaign. Then on top of that, I didn't think his media strategy was all that great. I think very often it came off as combative, when in not like particularly constructive manners when it was just coming from campaign staff, but that the candidate himself was not willing to necessarily go to that length. If you're going to commit to a populism and go after the media, you kind of can't go half-assed on that. Furthermore, I think that they didn't do a lot to, utilize a lot of the, grassroots endorsements that they had. I think about like my favorite moment from like the 2020 campaign was this one video with Fatboy SSE. He basically was campaigning for Yang, handing out money of his own to voters just to be able to help and spread love within specifically Harlem. There was no involvement this campaign. And there was so much that could have been done. Like, for instance, the most recent article that came out, I think it came out from the Uprising, was this article by Henry Walker talking to members of the former senior advising team of the Yang 2020 campaign and their conflicts with Tusk. They mentioned an opportunity where Dave Chappelle offered to do free shows for Andrew Yang, and they turned that down because they thought he was too controversial. Very often, I've heard personally from my network of people within Yang Gang, many people were looking to contribute, give feedback, get involved in more serious capacities, but they all got stonewalled, myself included. I applied, talked to their managing lead of the staffing, and didn't hear anything. Would have been nice to get the courtesy of a decline if I wasn't the right candidate, but it felt very weird to just not hear anything, and frankly, not hear anything from Yang himself, or Conrad, or any of the people I tried reaching out to try and see if I could contribute in more ways. And I know that's not just me, that's many people, and that's not just this campaign. This has been a consistent thread of an issue that's even plagued Humanity Forward. I've known many people who are Humanity First chapter organizers who were trying to organize for the Yang Gang movement locally, who were basically flat out stonewalled by their organization and Zach Grauman's leadership. So I don't think a lot of his grassroots support was being properly utilized. And I don't think he ever did a good job doing a media strategy that could actually, kind of bait the media into following the show rather than just going on the attack constantly. He always should have been expecting that they were always going to go after his lack of political experience. And he should have had a plan specifically from the start to message around that point specifically. And then finally, this is one of the harder ones to note, but it's policy. I just don't think he did nearly as good of a job as his 2020 campaign in building a cohesive, synergistic, simplistic, and detailed plan. I know those are hard things to all put together, but he really did a significantly better job in planning out the policy of his 2020 campaign. And I think it makes sense when you think about all the time that went into that and his much larger breadth of knowledge of what are the top issues within the federal system comparatively to New York City politics and what those voters cared about. I think about specifically his number one thing he was known for. He was known as the UBI guy. And do you know how hard it was to try and canvass and phone bank on his behalf and try to sell voters on him, on his number one thing being basic income, when they were not going to ever receive it? Very rarely actual voters are the people who would have been eligible for that means-tested program of 500,000 people. Those people rarely vote. It's a tragic thing about our system that people of more means more often vote. That's just the fact of the matter, and a lot of people would be excluded. 500,000 people of a city of roughly 8.3 million is kind of hard to say, yes, you will get that. And it's also very hard for people to say, hey, I understand very clearly that tangible benefit of a monthly check. $2,000 once per year doesn't sound like it goes that far for a lot of people. It sounds, as much as it is the biggest basic income pilot in America, it would be, it sounds rather lackluster, frankly. and non-impactful. I know it's impactful. We've seen the studies of it. But on a marketing level, it is very hard to tell people, hey, we are going to give this program and you're not going to get it. And we're also going to have this benefit go to illegal immigrants too. And there was a lot of things that made it really hard for us to sell during this race. And it could have been fixed. I know a lot of you are thinking, but John, there's budgetary constraints. He could only do so much. 1 billion is still the biggest in the country. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm still saying it's good. But here's the thing. It didn't have to be that way. He had a plan on his website that he could have leaned into much heavier had he been smarter about this, in my opinion. He should have expanded his Burrow Bucks program, the program that he wanted to do for boosting small businesses in the local economy by creating a basically local currency for people to use at those businesses. That could have been done for universal basic income. The problem of the whole budgetary, mindset is that the money will eventually flee. We're going to spend the money in cash relief, and then those people eventually will flee, and therefore we've lost money as an economy. Well, if it's a localized currency that only can be used locally, that money is going to stay internal to the New York City economy, and therefore you're going to have way less risk of that factor. And so you could have a currency control over this too. You could control the amount of supply that's going in and have significantly higher levels of budgetary flexibility if you chose to go that route. And, I think about this a lot because I think this would have been a huge, policy sell, a messaging sell that would help because everyone would have been included. But B, it would have just been better because we know that it would have been internalized to our own economy, rather than it potentially fleeing or having people purchase things from out of state. And the way you could have easily done this is you just say, okay, I'm going to apply a VAT to the city as well as our land value tax, but the VAT is the incentive. I'm going to apply a VAT to the city, all of our sales other than the basic, maybe essential goods. And then if you use our Burrow Bucks instead of dollars, that VAT no longer applies to you. That way we're getting people to actually utilize the currency and it goes back into the system. And so that's generally how I think we should be looking to get policies implemented, is actually staying true to the core message, which was universalism and providing for the actual basics. $2,000 is helpful, very much so. It could provide a Metro card for a year plus $460. It can do a lot to be able to make sure that you maybe can afford better food, or that you can go get maybe psychology help if you need it, or afford many things in your life that you may need. But it was not nearly as impactful as providing the basics. And I think that kind of message fell a bit short. And furthermore, there are certain things that I think he could have done better in understanding his strengths as a candidate. He led the #1 test prep company in the nation. He should lean into education policy and emphasize his background and those policies, not just reopening schools, which we've made videos, agree with, but that's a policy that was never really going to be impactful for a 2022 mayor. We always knew that it was going to be somewhat opened up by the, January 2022. They're going to be doing an opening now in September of 2021. So that was never the core education issue to focus on. And, the education fund stuff, where you can get like $1,000 to be able to use to help kids that are struggling with literacy skills. It's an okay program, but I don't think it did anything to address core quality of education voters. I think it really tried to circumvent the improvement of the schools. And I think that was further undermined by efforts to say, yeshiva schools, they should just have free reign on their education compared to needing to meet certain secular standards of education. I think he really fell short on some of his education focus. And then the second thing I think his strongest selling point would have been on is small business. He was the global ambassador of entrepreneurship under Barack Obama. Should have emphasized that way more. He started this company, Venture for America. He should have explained more what they were doing and the problems there that way it wasn't as easy for like a New York Times article to spike all the efforts of that organization. He should have leaned in on what small businesses need to be able to thrive. And now, mind you, he did that in degrees, but I don't think he leaned into defining himself on that. His message very much seemed to kind of go all over the map and even ended on him being the public safety candidate. Mind you, public safety is important, but that is not Andrew Yang's core issue. It's just not. And if you're going to try and appeal to the base, I would have loved to see some innovation rather than going to some traditional policing tactic methods on how do you improve the crime situation in New York City. You could do those things too. Mind you, I'm a fan of hotspot policing and focused deterrence policing. But you should also be able to talk to public safety efforts that go beyond just policing. You should be able to be that innovator to say, hey, not every solution requires this hammer of a cop. Sometimes I'll need a screwdriver. And sometimes that screwdriver doesn't need a hammer to be accompanying it always. Or at the same time, maybe they can call them in for backup. But I think that is the core problems. I don't think he understood what his true base was. I think he did a poor job of his media strategy and utilizing the grassroots because a lot of it got blocked off by the consultants. And I don't think his plans were as good as they were in the past to any degree. I don't think he had a core issue that made it really easy to understand that your life would be tangibly benefited. I think about the other things like public bank. A lot of people don't understand the benefit of a public bank because most people have a bank account. Yes, it helps a lot of people who don't. But it's really hard for a lot of voters to say, yes, that is going to improve my life. That is realistic and will improve my life too. And so those are the core reasons. I also think he shouldn't have run at the beginning. I really think he made a big misstep not taking the admin role under the Biden administration, which would have guaranteed him at least some modicum of political experience before running for another office. But at this point, we are where we are. Yang Gang, I want to talk to you about what is the next steps. We could talk all day about this, but I want to reemphasize our movement for the universal basics is important. We cannot give up. We must focus on doubling down on our efforts to organize on the local level. Even though Yang did not succeed in his quest for the executive office of the largest city in America, we all need to focus on building down ballot and building up a trickle-up politics in addition to a trickle-up economy. So, what does that mean? It means all of us trying to get involved. It means all of us trying to get involved in more than just electoral organizing, too. We need to have a long-term movement that isn't dependent on one candidate. We need to have the organizing infrastructure of media, technology, and even being the groups that can help funnel money to the candidates within the movement. These are all things that we know we are going to need. We are trying to work here to build up that infrastructure, and we invite you. But we know many people are going to go off to various campaigns to support. We are likely going to be focusing next on volunteering for Nina Turner, who we've endorsed for her race in the Ohio 11 congressional race. We then plan, probably after that primary, to be supporting various 2020 candidates. Still stuck in the 2020 mindset. 2022 candidates. And then we're going to be, continuing to try and work with other organizations to make non-electoral pushes. We need to be saying, I'm not just canvassing for an Andrew Yang or an insert name here candidate. We need to do more efforts to just go around in our communities and talk about basic income. Talk about these issues that are central to our movement. It's a lot easier to sell voters on ideas than it is to sell them on people. People come with their own baggage and often are compared to other personalities that might mesh more. Policies, though, that's where we need to get people focused and prioritizing. And so now, what do I think Yang's next step is? What will Andrew Yang do next? Well, one, I think he's going to take some time off. I think he is going to spend time with his family, his wife Evelyn, and his two boys. Then I think he's going to probably return to some capacity to Yang Speaks and Humanity Forward and continue to podcast as well as to find ways to get himself involved in the movement for promoting a basic income. Beyond that, I think he's going to continue writing the book that he's talked about. And I think he's going to likely go back to taking some guest time spots on CNN. Now, what would I be advising Andrew to do at this point? Well, I would emphasize leaning in on your strengths and being an outsider. I'd lean in on being an advocate, but not necessarily electorally. I'd lean in on trying to basically be the people's lobbyist. Go focus on advocating basic income and small business assistance and how do we address all these technological challenges and how do we address the structure of our democracy in Congress. I think that's what his best role is going to be within politics. But I very much see Yang as a person who likes to kind of go from opportunity to opportunity. So he could very much go outside the box. I mean, mind you, we've covered his career. He went from being a corporate lawyer to being a startup entrepreneur at several ventures that fell short in philanthropic giving, party organizing, healthcare. He then became a president at a test prep company, left that company, started his own nonprofit, ran for president, then was considering admin roles, then was running for mayor. So he's kind of all over the map. And I kind of just hope he'll take an approach that'll be consistent, stay within New York City politics, getting yourself involved as a voice within the system, as an outsider. Same, do it with DC. Enjoy your time with your family and kids. Write what you want to write as a reflection, and then continue to do the thought leadership and pushing of these issues. I think there can be a chance where Yang runs again. It can happen. It's low right now, and I think it'll take a long time. But I do think there is a day where he could run again. But I think for us all, Yang inclusive, we all need to change the approach and frankly, continue to move on. Continue to focus on what was the goal. Not the person, but the goal was always policy. Yang always said that himself when he was running for president. He didn't care if he won as long as people were going to end up sounding like him and doing the policies that he wanted. He wanted to influence the Overton window on universal basic income and the, wave of automation that is approaching us. He was successful there. And so I think, again, focus on being the big ideas guy again. Focus on being the outsider. Build up your time. Build up the political experience of people really knowing you over the years and trusting that you're going to be here for good. And then maybe you can come back. I know there are going to be people who disagree with me on that approach, and I would love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your feedback on all the criticisms and feedback that we gave again today. But as always, I want to emphasize we really do respect Andrew Yang. It was really disappointing that he did not win the New York City mayoral race. And we really want to thank each and every one of you out there who joined us, who joined Andrew in volunteering for that campaign. We fell short. This is not the end, and we will keep going. So that being said, my universal people, I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll check the description section down below to get involved in our movement. Click the link tree and find all the links. Subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you soon. Okay, people? Stay classy out there, my universal people.